Welcome back. Today's Part 8 contains the hardest questions from the actual AZ-104 exam. Last week, 3 students passed using these exact questions. Plus, you'll get the free PDF and access to 135K Azure jobs in the US, UK, and Canada. Part 8 focuses on advanced networking and security, the topics most people fail on. Let's dive in. Question 46. Your network contains an on-premises Active Directory Domain Services, ADDS domain. The domain contains the identities shown in the following table. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named Storage 1. The file shares in Storage 1 have an identity source of ADDS and default share level permissions set to enable permissions for all authenticated users and groups. You create an Azure Files share named Share 1 that has the roles shown in the following table. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant that contains a cloud-only user named User 3. You use Microsoft Entra Connect to sync OU1 from the ADDS domain to the Microsoft Entra tenant. For the following statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. User 2 can access content in Share 1. This question is testing whether User 2 meets all the requirements to access an Azure Files share that uses ADDS authentication. To access the share, User 2 needs to satisfy 2 main conditions. First, User 2 must be a hybrid identity that exists in both on-premises ADDS and Microsoft Entra ID. Second, User 2 needs proper permissions through Azure RBAC role assignments. The question wants you to check, does User 2 meet both requirements? Options: A, B. No, think of this like entering a secure building with 2 security checkpoints. At checkpoint 1, the guard verifies your identity exists in their system. At checkpoint 2, they check if you have the right badge and permissions to enter specific rooms. User 2 needs to pass both checkpoints. Let's trace User 2's journey. Is User 2 in the right organizational unit to be synced to Microsoft Entra ID? Does User 2 have an assigned role that grants access to the file share? If both answers are yes, User 2 gets in. Correct answer, yes. User 2 can access content in Share 1. User 2 meets all the necessary requirements for Azure Files access with ADDS authentication. Let me walk you through why User 2 has access step by step. Requirement 1, hybrid identity. User 2 is located in OU1, and the scenario explicitly states that Microsoft Entra Connect syncs OU1 from the ADDS domain to the Microsoft Entra tenant. This means User 2 exists in both the on-premises ADDS and Microsoft Entra ID, making User 2 a hybrid identity. This is the fundamental requirement for ADDS authentication with Azure Files. The user must be synced from on-premises to the cloud. Requirement 2, share level permissions. User 2 has been explicitly assigned the storage file data SMB share reader role on Share 1. This Azure RBAC role grants User 2 read permissions at the share level, allowing them to list and read files in the share. The role assignment is configured in Microsoft Entra ID, but the actual authentication happens against the on-premises ADDS domain. Now let's understand how Azure Files authentication with ADDS works. The authentication flow. When User 2 tries to access Share 1, they authenticate against the on-premises ADDS domain first. Since the storage account has ADDS as the identity source, Azure validates User 2's credentials with the on-premises domain. Then, Azure checks the share level permissions, RBAC roles, assigned in Microsoft Entra ID to determine what User 2 can do. Share level versus file level permissions. The storage file data SMB share reader role gives User 2 read access at the share level. This is the first layer of permissions. There's also file level permissions, NTFS permissions, that can be configured for more granular control. But since User 2 has share level read access, they can access the content. What User 2 can do. With the storage file data SMB share reader role, User 2 can read and list files and directories in Share 1, download files from the share, view file metadata and properties. What User 2 cannot do. The reader role is read-only, so User 2 cannot create, modify, or delete files, change file permissions, upload new content. The key takeaway. For a user to access Azure Files with ADDS authentication, they need 2 things. They must be a hybrid identity, synced from on-premises ADDS to Microsoft Entra ID, and they must have an appropriate Azure RBAC role assignment at the share level. User 2 has both. They're in OU1, which is synced, and they have the storage file data SMB share reader role assigned. Therefore, user 2 can successfully access content in Share 1. To get the free PDF or mock test, comment PDF or mock or both. I will share the downloadable link within the next 24 hours. Question 47. Your network contains an on-premises Active Directory Domain Services, ADDS domain. The domain contains the identities shown in the following table. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named Storage 1. The file shares in Storage 1 have an identity source of ADDS and default share level permissions set to enable permissions for all authenticated users and groups. You create an Azure Files share named Share 1 that has the roles shown in the following table. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant that contains a cloud-only user named User 3. You use Microsoft Entra Connect to sync OU1 from the ADDS domain to the Microsoft Entra tenant. For the following statement, select Yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select No. User 1 can access content in Share 1. This is a tricky question that tests your attention to detail. User 1 is a member of Group 1, and Group 1 has been assigned the Storage File Data SMB Share Contributor role on Share 1. At first glance, you might think User 1 should inherit access through group membership. But here's the catch. We need to check if User 1 is actually synced to Microsoft Entra ID. Remember, with ADDS authentication, you must be a hybrid identity. The question is, does User 1 meet this requirement? Options: yes, B, no. Think of this like a company that only accepts employee badges that are registered in their central system. User 1 has a team membership card, belongs to Group 1, and that team has access to a secured room, Share 1. However, User 1's individual employee badge was never registered in the central system because they work in a different department, OU2, that isn't connected to the central database. Even though User 1's team has access, User 1 personally can't get through the door because their individual badge isn't recognized. The system checks individual identities first before checking group memberships. Correct answer? No. User 1 cannot access content in Share 1. Even though User 1 is a member of Group 1, which has the Storage File Data SMB Share Contributor role assigned, User 1 fails the fundamental requirement for ADDS authentication, being a hybrid identity. Let me break down why User 1 is blocked. The critical issue: no sync for User 1. User 1 is located in OU2, but Microsoft Entra Connect is only configured to sync OU1 from the ADDS domain to the Microsoft Entra tenant. Since User 1 is not in OU1, User 1 is not synced to Microsoft Entra ID. This means User 1 exists only in the on-premises ADDS and has no corresponding identity in Microsoft Entra ID. Why hybrid identity is mandatory? Azure Files with ADDS authentication requires that users be hybrid identities. They must exist in both on-premises ADDS and Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft's documentation explicitly states only hybrid user identities that exist in both on-premises ADDS and Microsoft Entra ID can be authenticated and authorized for Azure File Share access. Since User 1 is not synced, User 1 cannot authenticate against the Azure Files Share, regardless of any role assignments or group memberships. What about Group 1 membership? You might wonder, Group 1 is in OU1 and is synced to Microsoft Entra ID, and Group 1 has the contributor role. Shouldn't User 1 inherit permissions through group membership? Here's why that doesn't work. Even though Group 1 is synced and has permissions, the individual user, User 1, still needs to be a hybrid identity to authenticate. Azure Files checks the user's individual identity first during authentication. If that identity doesn't exist in Microsoft Entra ID, the authentication fails before Azure even checks group memberships or role assignments. The key takeaway: for Azure Files with ADDS authentication, being a member of a group that has permissions is not enough. The individual user must be a hybrid identity synced from on-premises ADDS to Microsoft Entra ID. User 1 is in OU2, which is outside the sync scope, so User 1 is not a hybrid identity and cannot authenticate or access Share 1, even though User 1 belongs to Group 1, which has the contributor role. Always check both the user's OU location and whether that OU is being synced. If this video is helping you, support us by hitting the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Question 48. You have an Azure Virtual Network named VNet1 that contains the following settings: IPv4 address space 172.6.10.0/24, subnet name Subnet address range 172.168.10.0-25. What is the maximum number of virtual machines that can connect to Subnet 1? This question is testing your understanding of IP address calculations in Azure subnets. You're given a subnet with a /25 address range, and you need to figure out how many virtual machines can connect to it. The trick here is that Azure doesn't give you all the IP addresses in a subnet. Azure reserves some addresses for its own use. So you need to calculate the total IP addresses available in a 25 subnet, then subtract the reserved addresses to find how many are actually usable for virtual machines. Options: A, 24, B, 25, C, 123, D, 128. Think of this like renting a parking garage with 128 parking spaces. Sounds great, right? But then you discover that the garage management has permanently reserved 5 spaces for maintenance vehicles, security, emergency access, and other operational needs. So even though the garage has 128 total spaces, only 123 are available for regular customers like you. Azure works the same way. It reserves certain IP addresses in every subnet for network operations, leaving fewer addresses available for your virtual machines than you might expect. Correct answer: 123. The maximum number of virtual machines that can connect to Subnet 1 is 123. This is calculated by determining the total IP addresses in a /25 subnet and subtracting Azure's reserved addresses. Let me walk you through the calculation step by step. Step 1. Calculate total IP addresses. A 25 subnet means 25 bits are used for the network portion, leaving 7 bits for host addresses. The formula is 27 equals 128 total IP addresses. So the subnet 172.168.25 provides 128 IP addresses, ranging from 172.6.10.0 to 172.6.10.127. Step 2. Subtract Azure's reserved addresses. Azure reserves 5 IP addresses in every subnet that cannot be assigned to resources. These reserved addresses are 172.16.10.0, its network address x.x.0, 172.16.10.1, reserved by Azure for the default gateway, 172.16.10.2, reserved by Azure to map Azure DNS IPs to the VNet space, 172.6.10.3, reserved by Azure to map Azure DNS IPs to the VNet space, 172.16.10.127, network broadcast address, the last address in the range. Step 3. Calculate usable addresses. Total IP addresses, 128 minus reserved addresses 5, equals 123 usable IP addresses. Now let's understand why Azure reserves these specific addresses. Why the first address, .0? This is the network address used to identify the subnet itself. It's a standard networking convention required for protocol conformance. Why .1 for the gateway? Every Azure subnet needs a default gateway to route traffic. Azure automatically assigns the first usable IP address, byte 1, as the gateway for the subnet. Why byte 2 and byte 3 for DNS? Azure provides DNS services within your virtual network. These two addresses map Azure DNS services to your VNet address space, allowing resources in the subnet to resolve DNS names. Why the last address, 1U7? This is the broadcast address for the subnet, another standard networking convention. In a 25 subnet, the last address is used for network broadcasts. Important note about the calculation. This 5-address reservation applies to all Azure subnets, regardless of size. Whether you have a 29 subnet, 8 total IPs, or a 16 subnet, 65,536 total IPs, Azure always reserves the first 4 and the last address. For smaller subnets like /29, this means only 3 usable addresses remain. 8 minus 5 equals 3. For 28 subnets, you get 11 usable addresses. 16 minus 5 equals 11. The key takeaway: for any Azure subnet calculation, use this formula. Total IPs equals 232 minus CIDR prefix. Usable IPs equals total IPs minus 5. For a /25 subnet, 128 total IPs minus 5 reserved equals 123 maximum virtual machines. Always remember that Azure reserves the first 4 addresses and the last address in every single subnet. Question 49. You have an Azure container registry named Contoso 2023, as shown below. You need to enable Contoso 2023 to use a dedicated data endpoint. Which 2 settings should you configure for Contoso 2023? This question asks which 2 Azure portal settings you need to access to enable the dedicated data endpoint feature for an Azure container registry. You're looking for where to upgrade the pricing tier, since dedicated data endpoints require premium tier, and where to actually enable the feature itself. The options are A, overview, B, properties, C, networking, D, tasks, E, access control, E, events. Think of it like upgrading your internet plan. First, you need to change your subscription tier at the billing section. Then you enable the advanced features in your network settings. Dedicated data endpoints give your registry its own regional URLs instead of shared blob storage, improving security against data exfiltration. Correct answer, B, properties. C, networking. To enable dedicated data endpoints for an Azure Container Registry, you need to configure two settings: properties to upgrade to premium tier, and networking to enable the dedicated data endpoint feature. Here's why both are needed. Dedicated data endpoints are only available in the premium service tier of Azure Container Registry. Looking at the image, Contoso 2023 is currently on the standard pricing plan, so you first need to go to Properties to upgrade the SKU to premium tier. Once you've upgraded to premium, you then go to Networking, Public Access, and select the checkbox for Enable Dedicated Data Endpoint, and click Save. This creates regional data endpoints following the pattern Contoso 2023.region, data.azureseer.io instead of using shared.blob.core windows.net endpoints, which helps prevent data exfiltration and allows tighter firewall rules. Why the other options are incorrect. A, overview. This is just a summary dashboard showing basic information. You can't configure dedicated data endpoints here. D, tasks. This section is for ACR tasks, automated container builds, not for network or data endpoint configuration. E, access control, IAM. This manages role-based access permissions for users, not network endpoint settings. F, events. This configures event grid subscriptions for registry events, not data endpoints. Quick takeaway, properties. Upgrade to premium plus networking, enable dedicated data endpoint, equals 2 steps to get regional data endpoints like Contoso 2023. Question 50. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named Contoso.com. You collaborate with an external partner named Fabricom.com. You plan to invite users in Fabricom.com to the Contoso.com tenant. You need to ensure that invitations can be sent only to Fabricom.com users. What should you do in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center? This question is asking where to configure an Allowlist policy so that B2B guest invitations can only be sent to users from a specific domain, fabricam.com. You need to identify the correct Microsoft Entra Admin Center location that controls which external domains are allowed or blocked for guest invitations. The options are A, from cross-tenant access settings, configure the tenant restrictions settings. B, from cross-tenant access settings, configure the Microsoft Cloud settings. C, from external collaboration settings, configure the guest user access restriction settings. D, from external collaboration settings, configure the collaboration restriction settings. Think of it like a VIP guest list at an exclusive event. You want to allow only people from Fabricam.com to receive invitations and automatically block everyone else. This is called an Allowlist or whitelist policy, where you specify exactly which domains are permitted for B2B collaboration. Correct answer, D, from external collaboration settings, configure the collaboration restriction settings. To ensure invitations can be sent only to Fabricom.com users, you need to configure collaboration restrictions within external collaboration settings in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. Here's the exact process. Navigate to Microsoft Entra Admin Center, Identity, External Identities, External Collaboration Settings. Under Collaboration Restrictions, select Allow Invitations Only to the specified domains, most restrictive. Then under Target Domains, enter Fabricam.com. This creates an allow list that permits B2B invitations only to that specific domain while automatically blocking all others. Collaboration restrictions give you 3 policy options: allow any domain default, deny specific domains, Blocklist, or allow only specific domains, Allowlist. Since the question requires invitations to go only to Fabricam.com users, you need the Allowlist option, which is the most restrictive setting. Why the other options are incorrect. A, tenant restriction settings. This feature controls which external Microsoft Entra tenants your users can access from your network, not which domains can receive B2B invitations. Different purpose entirely. B, Microsoft Cloud settings. This configures cross-tenant access for specific Microsoft Cloud environments, but doesn't control domain-level Allowlist blocklist policies for invitations. C. Guest user access restrictions. This setting controls what guest users can see and do within your directory, like viewing group memberships, not which domains can be invited in the first place. Quick takeaway: external collaboration settings. Collaboration restrictions equals where you set allow list/blocklist policies for B2B domains. For only Fabricam.com, choose Allow invitations only to specified domains and add Fabricam.com.